conversation for the day, and from talking about vaccines and approved medical treatments for problems, let's talk about a substance that's been around for ages and centuries together, has been a big debating point about whether or not it should be legally allowed to be used for medicinal purposes. And I'm talking about cannabis and various products of cannabis, including marijuana. Now, why are we talking about this now? Why has the debate about legalization of cannabis really been reignited? That's because of the recent step taken by United Nations and what India had to say, the stand that India took over this decision. So India actually voted along with the majority at the United Nations to remove cannabis and cannabis resin from the list of the most dangerous substances in the flagship International Convention on Narcotic Drugs. This is a big decision that was taken by United Nations, and we as a country said yes, this substance should be removed from the most dangerous substances list. In fact, the United Nations has said this on reclassifying cannabis. The cannabis will be removed from the most dangerous substances list. It was listed alongside deadly opioids, and cannabis subjected to strictest control schedules for 59 years. Control over cannabis has actually discouraged its use for medical purposes. There is now a growing agreement on the acceptable use of cannabis for various kind of medical purposes. Therapeutic potential of recreational drug will be recognized. Now, of course, right now in our country, all things cannabis are illegal. A lot of you would have discovered that in the during the whole series of raids conducted by the Narcotics Control Bureau when it came to Bollywood, and what they actually found in some of these raids. In most of these raids, they didn't find any of the drugs. But here are the basic statistics for cannabis. 3.1 crore users documented here in our country as per a national survey that was done on extent and pattern of substance use in 2019. 72 lakh problematic users, 25 lakh independent users, and then of course there are statistics on consumption of charas or gaja or even bhang. The question I'm simply going to ask a wide variety of panelists tonight is it time for India to also look at some kind of legalization of cannabis, regulated use, especially for medicinal purposes, like it is in many parts of the world already? Now, let's say good evening to those who are joining us in this conversation. Mr. B.V. Kumar, former DG of NCB, Dr. Shyam Aggarwal, oncologist and a senior consultant at Sir Gangaram Hospital, Dr. Atul, professor at the National Drug Dependence Treatment Center, Vikram Patel, Pershing Square Professor of Global Health at the Harvard Medical School. But first up though, I want to go across to Tathagata Satpathy, former Member of Parliament of the Lok Sabha, BJD leader. And that's because for any kind of regulation to come into place, we will need our politicians and political parties to come together in Parliament and talk about it. And Mr. Satpathy actually does have a very clear, interesting view on it. So let's start with you, Mr. Satpathy. Is it now time to legalize cannabis in our country?
See, cannabis has been a heritage for India and Indians. It's not something new. It has been there for thousands of years. It's a plant. It's a gift from nature. I don't know. It's the Brits who actually made it illegal, and then we carried it on like a little puppy. We carried on that attitude. Apart from puritanical thoughts, which I would not like to get into because I'm not a puritanical at all, where is the problem? See, in my state of Orissa, for example, or even if you have gone to the mountains, you would have seen in Himachal Pradesh and even Kashmir when I much earlier had gone and seen, it is a plant that grows on the hillsides where poor people live, where in my state it is mostly growing in areas where Adivasis, the tribal people, live. And what has the NDPS Act done? It has created an instrument of torture, of subjugation for the police, for the goons, and later on the Maoists. What happens is, when this plant is growing, the farmers or the villagers, they cut it and they try to sell it. And we classify it as a drug. the urban Indian thinks it is perfectly okay if they drink alcohol, which creates, I feel, many people get violent with alcohol. Many crimes are committed by people who are on alcohol. But I have yet to see any scientific evidence that marijuana has damaged health, or it is even as bad as tobacco, or it has instigated people to commit crimes, to murder or rape or things like that. So, in my opinion, the whole NDPS Act needs to be revisited. It needs to be scrapped. You have to see what actually harms people physically, mentally. How do you create a situation that something that is a gift of nature does not get categorized as serious as a damaging drug? And now the world has taken cognizance. It is time that India and its policymakers also decide that we have to, I was reading, it was there on a website, I was reading the note given by India, although India tried to declassify, but if you see the note prepared by some Babu, it's a very vague, roundabout note given by the government of India in favor of declassifying cannabis. So I think we should take a very clear stand, and within the country,
Right.
we should absolutely scrap the NDPS and rewrite it.
Well, you imagine, how it would actually seem within the political circles, Mr. Satpathy, and you would know this better than anybody else. For a party which in some of the states has taken a very clear, vociferous position, even attacking all of Bollywood for their consumption of drugs, marijuana, ganja, what have you, and then to on a international platform, go ahead and back legalization. For some of their own vote bank, it would be difficult for them to explain it. But the interesting part is if they're willing to take a stand, and if we are as a country willing to take a stand internationally, then maybe it is time to gradually begin the conversation back home as well. In fact, let me actually go across to Dr. Shyam on this. And Dr. Shyam Aggarwal, one wonders at what point did we change our view about this substance? It's been part of our culture for centuries together. At what point did we decide as a society that this is very, very harmful, as dangerous as any opioid, more dangerous than alcohol and what even alcohol or tobacco does to a person?
Look, Tanvi, I think the cannabis or marijuana does have a potential to cause addiction. So that perhaps is the reason why, people are scared of using this particular plant or seeds, etc. So, but then, as an oncologist, what I can tell you is that, for example, in the US and several other countries, the potential benefits of marijuana have been identified, particularly in patients who are suffering with cancer. So as you know, that cancer chemotherapy drugs do induce a lot of nausea and vomiting. So this, the cannabinoids have been approved by the National Comprehensive Cancer Network in the U.S. in 2018, and they are in the formulary of the U.S. Pharmacopoeia. And therefore, for breakthrough vomiting, which is induced by cancer chemotherapy drugs, one can use these molecules in the form of tablets or capsules or even oil. So that is the first benefit. The second benefit which we see is controlling the pain by using this particular a drug in the form of which is the THC, the tetrahydrocannabinol, is the active molecule which works in controlling the pain.
I'm unable to get your audio through properly, Dr. Shyam Aggarwal.
So, I was just telling you the benefits in cancer patients. So the second benefit is in controlling the pain with which the patients with cancer suffer. And, so it is effective there and it is approved there also. The third benefit in cancer patients which we have identified is that it induces hunger and people, put on weight. So patients who have terminal cancer, who are suffering, they lose weight, they become cachectic, they are not hungry. So this molecule, if, given in the measured doses, can induce that, feeling of well-being, and they put on weight. And of course, there is data to support that some cancer, particularly the brain tumors, may be affected by using cannabinoids. So, there needs to be a talk between the doctors, between the physicians, between the researchers, and as you said, the politicians, to identify the use of these, cannabinoids and bring it over. Like you have opioids. We're using morphine for cancer patients for other pain. So, this will be a drug which will be available to humans who are suffering with various issues related to cancer and maybe other issues, for example, epilepsy. So the drug is approved for patients with some rare epileptic disorders. So, I think you need to start a dialogue between the politicians, between the executive, between the physicians and the researchers, and to see how we can bring about the availability of these molecules in the Indian market.
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely. So, maybe we can look around the world with various countries having done so much of exhaustive research and explored with all kinds of legislations and regulation to what extent should it be allowed, especially for the medical purposes. And obviously, a lot of places have explored legally allowing it even for recreational purposes. Vikram Patel, coming to you on that aspect to begin with, what are the examples or precedents we have in terms of regulating? The biggest fear everybody has is if you allow it, you don't have a control on how much anybody is consuming, how they're getting it, if they're getting addicted to it, and if there's a potential damage taking place.
That's right. And I think there's a big difference between decriminalization or legalization for recreational use and for medicinal use. As the previous speaker rightly pointed out, we already have many substances that are perfectly legal for medicinal use, such as opioid analgesics, but are illegal for street use. And I think the real conversation here is about recreational use, which the Member of Parliament was really referring to. I think it is absolutely correct to say that many substances can potentially escalate to other substances, but there is absolutely no evidence to say that any one particular substance leads to another. I think the fear that cannabis would act as a gateway drug has been often overestimated. And if anything, what the evidence shows is when you criminalize cannabis, what you're effectively doing is pushing cannabis users into the same web of the mafia, the criminals who are also selling far more dangerous drugs. So therefore, you actually facilitate the transition from cannabis use to much more dangerous drugs. On the other hand, if you decriminalize cannabis use, you even legalized it, what you do is you take this large proportion of users, 30 million people in India who already admit to a government survey that they use cannabis, you move them into the legal market, and therefore you break the access that the criminal mafia has to this very large population.
Okay, so the first part, of course, will be to decriminalize it. And when it comes to that, if I can actually ask Mr. B.V. Kumar this question. Mr. B.V. Kumar, a lot of it also has to do with one stringent act that we have in place, the NDPS Act for all kinds of drugs. Would you say that perhaps marijuana is something that can be removed from that list? How effective is it to have that kind of a law in terms of the substance usage, the substance being sold, distributed? Does the existence of NDPS Act really have an impact?
Yeah, I would like to deal with 2-3 different aspects. One, as you rightly pointed out in the introductory remarks, that 53 countries, including India, USA, and a couple of European nations, they all voted that there should be decriminalization of cannabis and cannabis resin, that is hashish, and bring it out of Schedule 4, which deals with hard drugs like heroin and other things, and bring it to Schedule 1, which deals with soft drugs. That's one part. The second part is, if you look around other countries, particularly USA, Canada, and other places, in 33 states in USA, they have decriminalized completely the use of cannabis. But in some states within USA, it is used for medicinal purposes, as pointed out by Dr. Shyam Aggarwal. And in about 12 states, it is permitted for recreational use. I have no objection if it is liberalized and permitted to be used for recreational use. There's no difficulty. But the difficulty comes in is if it is permitted without much restrictions and regulations, then it will create problems. For example, it has, though the doctor pointed out there was it is helpful in treatment of cancer to create appetite and other things. And there are a lot of risks in work situations in scenario where a person is driving a car or a truck and other things. For example, studies in the latest journal of the American Journal of American Medical Association, December 1st article, studies have been reported where the traffic accidents increased from 8% in 2016 to 2007 to 18% in 2016, and all led to fatalities for the car, for the driver, for the vehicle, and all those things. The other problem is if it is a person takes cannabis and combined with alcohol, it leads to a terrible situation where it from 5% concentration in the blood, it suddenly shoots up to 15%. So within 60 minutes, it will come down to almost 0%. But during that particular period when it goes high, with the combination of cannabis and alcohol, it leads to a terrible situation where it can cause any amount of problems for the person in a work situation. That is the biggest danger. The second danger is even medically, it has been, a lot of studies have been conducted. It shows that it slows down your coordination. For example, you're walking, you can't walk steadily, you will start wobbling. Then your size and shape of your thalamus will get disturbed. Then effect on memory, attention, and learning. Particularly in the case of teenagers, if they start using cannabis, that is the stage when the brain is still developing because they're still studying, they're improving their knowledge and other things. It affects their learning process. These are the various difficulties that they have found. As pointed out, it leads to a high, a person feels good. But then if it's probably in a home atmosphere or in a recreational place, there may not be any danger. But then if it's in a work situation, in a work scenario, if a person takes cannabis, and that if combined with alcohol, it will lead to a terrible situation leading to accidents and other things. Now, coming to regularization, I think there should be, it can be liberalized, but there should be strict regulations, how and in what situations it can be liberalized, in what situations it can be permitted. In a recreational place like a club or a place where like alcohol is permitted in certain licensed premises, where a person can go to the club or to a hotel and sit and drink. They are licensed premises like that. There are particular places are sort of notified that where the recreational facility can be there, where you can have the facility of smoking cannabis, then certainly probably the government can liberalize and permit it. Now, I am personally against the criminalization of cannabis abuse, particularly against the criminalization of cannabis abuse because it has been, as pointed out by the Honorable Member of Parliament, that it's been traditionally being used by a number of sadhus and number of persons in the hill states where it grows wild, the cannabis plant grows wild. So these are the situations. But then one has to keep in mind also the side effects. I don't like my children or my grandchildren to become drug addicts, particularly even cannabis. Because when you come back home and other things, when you see their shape and other things.
Well, I understand what you're saying, Mr. B.V. Kumar, but like you said that where do you allow it and to what extent can people, those who are sitting in clubs and drinking, will people be consuming it there? But on the other hand, anybody could say that, well, we know what alcohol does to people who consume it. A couple of drinks and the kind of chaos that could unleash, what it does to your body over short term, over long term, what it does to a society, how it breaks families. We allow that, and it's an accepted part of our daily lifestyle and our society. So something which does have some kind of medicinal advantages, obviously that's the starting, and then you go to the recreational purpose where you say, well, if you're allowing other substances which may not also be necessarily healthy for you at all, but you allow the adults to make that choice, would you be willing as a country and a society to allow for this? And because you raised the other point, I want to tell our viewers this. India, surprisingly, and I didn't know this as well until I started researching for this debate, that India resisted international pressure for the longest time last century when, the whole world was coming together with stringent norms and laws and crackdown on the use of cannabis and all kinds and all versions which are possible. In fact, when the single convention legislation was passed in 1961, India refused, citing historical and cultural usage of the same for centuries. At that point of time, when the whole world was discussing criminalization of cannabis, we actually resisted it. And we said, well, it's part of our history and our culture. We've forever seen how people use it, and we don't think a international law or a treaty is needed for it. United States was actually the one that created the pressure worldwide. India got 2 respites, 25 years to clamp down on the consumption and the usage and exclusion of bhang, which we made from seeds and not the leaves from that schedule. 25 years later, during Ronald Reagan's term, is when US finally managed to put so much pressure on our country that at that point of time, the Rajiv Gandhi government in 1985 passed the Narcotics, Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act, known as the NDPS. So if you look at our history, not very long time ago, we had a completely different view, even as the government was concerned. Dr. Atul Ambedkar, to the other point that was raised about the harmful effects, and it kills your memory, it slows down your response system. Now, if you can shed some more light on that aspect, the downside of marijuana and how much of it has to be consumed for a detrimental effect.
Thank you, Tanvi. The former DG Sahab has rightly conveyed to us some of the potential harmful effects which can occur with cannabis. See, it is no one's case that we are talking about a totally harmless substance here. Of course, cannabis has certain degrees of potential risks and harms. The only point being discussed worldwide in the scientific circles is the degree of harms caused by cannabis is not as severe as some of the other substances and perhaps does not warrant as strict regulations as it is currently being subjected to. In fact, this recent move of deleting it from the Schedule 4, we really should not read too much into that. At this moment, this move just reflects a tacit recognition that cannabis indeed may have some potential medical usages. So that's what has been achieved through this particular move which has happened recently. There are a large body of researchers and experts throughout the world who believe that cannabis need not remain even part of Schedule 1 of Narcotic Convention at all. It need not be regulated to the same degree such as other kinds of narcotic drugs are regulated. So cannabis is not harmless, but every mature society should have systems in place to allow its citizens to use any kind of harmful products in a responsible manner. A large part of that has been tried and successfully done in India with alcohol. So there is no reason to believe that that we simply do not have the wherewithal to legally regulate a kind of harmful substance.
Okay, you've made a very interesting point, and I want to actually take that point across to Mr. Tathagata Satpathy. Mr. Tathagata, there are harmful effects, of course, but let it be the people who decide, what they want to choose. How do you tackle this regulation-wise or legislation-wise? And in fact, first of all, to begin with, do you agree with what was raised by 2 other experts about how it makes people slow and the downside or the harmful side of that?
I do not agree with Mr. Kumar, the ex-DG of the ex-DG, and I think that he has gone in with the puritanical thought, and that is how I will not blame him, because that is how Indian bureaucracy functions, on very old, dated thoughts. So that is fine with me, and we should not hold that against anybody. But let me put one point. In Parliament, when I spoke about this, I very clearly mentioned that I do not speak in favor of legalizing it. I speak in favor of decriminalizing it. See what happens. It is not only the recreational part that we are handling. There is a lot of money to be made from marijuana. China itself, which has gone on with the bloc that was opposing declassifying it as a drug, China itself is making millions of US dollars marketing products made out of hemp, cannabis, marijuana, whatever, the same genus, cannabis. So what it shows is that this has a lot of potential for young people to work on and to make money and to be economically independent first. Secondly, if you legalize it, and we are seeing how the Farm Bill is facing opposition, the moment you legalize it in India, then the government sits and decides who will get licenses to farm it, and that will go to big farmers. Whereas I know it's possible that small farmers, marginal farmers, can grow cannabis plants in their fields on the sides. If they are growing paddy in the middle, they can grow it on the sides. It does not require water. It does not require too much of tending or labor or investment. And it will be a cash crop for them. So for small marginal farmers, you have to decriminalize it, not legalize it. And there's a lot of industrial use, medicinal use. We have only talked to doctors. But are we aware that there are fabric like this, which is made from cannabis? This is a cannabis material that I am wearing right now. And there's also people who are making bricks. They are making homes from cannabis and mud. So there's thousands of usage that the cannabis plant can be put to. We are losing out on that. Although originally nature gifted that to us, gifted that to India. And pointlessly, just because there was US pressure, and just because the Congress government at that time was a weak-kneed government and they gave in, we are suffering because of that. And what is happening, students, or even what happened in Bollywood, we saw some small little amounts of cannabis for personal consumption, and that the NCB, which has nothing better to do in this country, but go after these small little users, they go and arrest students and office goers who have very tiny amounts in their pockets. They are for personal use. Whereas by keeping it illegal, we are actually allowing a mafia to grow. We are allowing the goons to make money, and we are allowing the police to also make money. Therefore, I feel that the bureaucracy in India opposes decriminalizing marijuana because it brings in a lot of money for them. Just like dry states, the police makes a lot of money, and we know a few dry states in India where the police makes most of its money, and politicians also make money from that. So if you were talking about the dangers of marijuana, I think the dangers of marijuana are nothing when you compare it with alcohol. So if you want to ban something, better ban alcohol first.
Yeah.
Let it be a completely dry country so that no neighboring state can smuggle in alcohol into your state. Let us tackle that first. Because more road accidents, I don't know where this road accident figure came from, but I guess if you calculate the road accidents taking place in India today and how much because of marijuana intoxication or a high from marijuana and how much because of drunkenness would be so much higher. If you take crime, I don't think people get into crimes or into violence when they are stoned and high. They would like to keep quiet, and like the ex-DG said, they get slow, they get peaceful. They get more focused in their work. They write poetry. They study better. I have myself, I admit it, I have myself smoked it when I was in school and in college. And I gave my exams, smoked, got stoned, studied, and it helped me keep my memory intact. And I have not lost my memory. And I am not even shy to admit it that I have smoked and I am happy. And I tell young people that if you like to smoke, I know it is not addictive. When I left it, I did not need medication. I did not need any care to be given to me. I just decided this is not my line because I got into a bigger intoxication. That was politics. So I left marijuana, which was nothing. It was child's play for me. And I found, like alcohol, politics also destroys you from the innards. And I quit that also.
I like how you made that analogy about the impact and the damage done by alcohol versus politics, Mr. Satpathy. But let me ask Dr. Atul Ambekar. Dr. Ambekar, would it be correct, scientifically speaking, based on available information, that alcohol, which is freely available and not criminalized, has a more damaging effect than cannabis?
Yes, of course. Various group of researchers have tried to categorize and hierarchically arrange various psychoactive substances in terms of the degree to which they can be harmful. And among them, within that list, alcohol and tobacco always come on the top of the list in terms of harms to individuals using themselves as well as harms to the society, harms to others. Cannabis comes way down in that list. And that's another scientific reason why cannabis need not be subjected to the same degree of controls as not only illegal drugs, but even the legal substances such as tobacco and alcohol. In fact, this excessive vilification and demonization of cannabis in India was a British project, a British ploy, perhaps because they wanted to encourage use of the Indian-made foreign liquor, what we call as Indian-made foreign liquor today. A very good example of how we Indians have internalized this concept that cannabis is somehow desi, cannabis is somehow for the uncultured people, while alcohol is much more sophisticated, is a great example from the movie Dawn. In Dawn, there are two Amitabh Bachchans, but it's the Thoda Ganga Kinare Wala who consumes bhang or cannabis. Is a much more sophisticated, westernized Don who is shown as consuming alcohol. So that's how we Indians have internalized thinking cannabis to be something to be of a lesser category of or less sophisticated kind of psychoactive substance. So it's actually a westernization and colonization project which has put alcohol higher on the desire list as compared to cannabis. In terms of its harms, alcohol is way more harmful than cannabis.
Mr. B.V. Kumar, would you like to come in here and respond to what Mr. Satpathy and Dr. Ambekar are saying?
Thank you. I agree with the Honorable Member of Parliament when he said that it should be decriminalized. I fully agree with it. There's no need to legalize as sort of put restrictions either on cultivation or its consumption. But as I said, consumption should be for recreational purposes and should not be meant for street, abuse and things like that. That is one part. The second part is, as rightly pointed out by Dr. Ambedkar, that the alcohol is more harmful to a human being compared to cannabis. In the case of abuse of alcohol, what happens is it becomes violent and probably the spouse is the first target when a person becomes high on alcohol. But in the case of cannabis, a person becomes quiet. He becomes subdued because it has a sort of a soothing effect and he becomes quiet. My difficulty was only in a work scenario, particularly when a person is driving or operating a machine or things like that, when probably an accident could happen. That's where the risk comes in. But for certainly recreation purposes, it should be liberalized. I have no objection at all for that. And I don't think as bureaucrats we have any objection for this type of what you call proper rational approach when decriminalizing this particular drug. But only one caution we should have is if a person, just like in the case of alcohol, a person starts with 1 peg, 2 pegs, then a stage will come, he will not get that satisfaction. He graduates to 3 pegs and so on. Similarly, in the case of cannabis, if a person takes continuously, not as an occasional smoker or occasional user, then there's no problem. But if he becomes a regular addict, then he wants a higher kick. Then what he goes is he graduates into harder drugs like heroin. That is the danger. So that's why if it is restricted to recreational purposes to start with, then I think depending upon our experience in the field, we can further liberalize it. After all, a country like us, we should be dynamic in our approaches to various situations. So that will be probably the thing. The other short point which I would like to mention is bhang is the male plant of the cannabis. It is less harmful and people thoroughly enjoy it during Holi and other places. The female species of cannabis, that is more dangerous, from which hashish is extracted as a resin, THC, as pointed out one of the panelists. That is more harmful and more.
Right.
That is the thing. Even that is probably recommended to be liberalized by the United Nations Commission on Drugs, UNCD. So that's how I would like to.
Right. Mr. P.V. Kumar, if I can just come in here, I wanted a small, clarification or a follow-up question with you. Will the Indian regulation, the NDPS Act, will there be any bearing on that because of the Indian stand, the stand we've taken internationally? If UN says we are removing it from the list of most dangerous substances, does that have any bearing on our own act or the way we, deal with this problem?
Yeah. So India is a signatory to the UN Convention of 1985. Our entire law was entirely revised after the 1985 convention. Similarly, amendments were brought in 1988 also, bringing about death penalty for second offences and things like that. Again, it was based on UN Convention. So if as a signatory with the United Nations Commission on Drugs, if we are a signatory, we have to bring out a lot of changes in our NDPS Act of 1985. And that is necessary and must be done if you want to legalize cannabis. And it will be done automatically since we are a signatory for the UN conventions. Otherwise, it will be incomplete.
So that's an interesting clarification, and thank you so much for that. Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Okay. If I can, I think Dr. Shyam Aggarwal is back with us. Dr. Shyam, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Tanvi, I can hear you. Yeah. Can you hear me, Tanvi? I'm there. Yes.
Okay, Dr. Shyam Aggarwal, as part of the conversation that we were having was the harmful effects of cannabis and the extent of consumption versus some of the other substances which are actually legal in our country. The other argument that's usually made against it is to say, well, this is the stepping stone. This is the first step. आज आप गांजा या marijuana पी रहे हैं, कल आप और hardcore substance consume करेंगे. You'll then move on to heroin or cocaine and what have you. Is there any correlation and any study that proves that yes, indeed, this does happen?
You see, absolutely. As you've heard the previous speakers and experts, so it is not safe, I think, for people to consume marijuana and say, for example, come on the roads and start driving. That's going to be an important issue because the accidents could take place. Now, for example, drinking and driving is not allowed. If you have taken a drink, you're not supposed to drive because it is unsafe. So I think the use of marijuana for medicinal use has to be very, very, critically looked into as to how it will be implemented so that the safety of the society is not jeopardized. We want to use the medicine as a medicine, marijuana, but you can't have people use it and come on roads. So it has to be done in the hotel. You see, the other important thing to understand about marijuana is that when you take it by mouth, that is by oral route, you put it in your food or drink or whatever, it takes a little while to get into your body, and then it is taken care of by the liver, and the liver converts it into a psychoactive substance which goes to the brain. So it takes some time, half an hour or 1 hour. So if you start consuming in a hotel, so you have to be confined to the hotel or that recreational room for 2-3 hours. You can't just take the marijuana in the hotel and half an hour later you are driving, and then you cause an accident and you become a nuisance to the society. So these are very, very important issues, so which we need to address before we even think of bringing it into our society. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very valid point that you've raised. Vikram Patel, would you like to come in here? How is this tackled, across the world? Yes, Mr. Tathagata, I'll come to you. Let me just get in a comment from Vikram Patel and then I'll come to you,
Yes.
about it.
Sure. Sure.
Sorry, what's your question, Tanvi?
So, Vikram Patel, how is this issue handled? The point that is being raised here is should you allow people who consume marijuana to be out on the street driving, that they will be a danger not to themselves but other people as well? How do you stop that?
Well, I think, there is a valid point there. The fact remains that I don't think we should treat these issues as a binary. Does it harm you or does it not? It's always a question of how much do you use and in what circumstances do you use it in? It's exactly the same issue as with alcohol. And we've heard the previous speaker really describe it very clearly. One shouldn't drink and drive, but that doesn't mean that one should ban drinking. And I think the same falls true for cannabis. I think one does have to acknowledge that cannabis does slow some of your neuromuscular functions and cognitive functions down when you are intoxicated, but only when you're intoxicated. And it makes good sense in my mind to therefore be wary about doing things like driving and have, I think that one of the speakers mentioned, you operating heavy machinery. But that doesn't mean that cannabis harms you permanently, nor does it mean that you cannot actually do many other activities while you're under the influence of cannabis. I just want to say one more thing, Tanvi, which is important. Many of the important points that we are making about the dangers that cannabis has on your mental health and physical health are related to a very potent form of cannabis that is being utilized in Western Europe and North America that is not naturally grown cannabis. This is a hybrid cannabis that is being grown on an industrial scale in hydroponic labs and so on. This is completely different from the cannabis that's available in India, which grows on the mountainside. And in terms of the concentration of the active compounds that create these sort of psychotropic effects, it's much weaker in India than it is in the West. And I think we as a country need to be very wary. And I think the member of parliament referred to this. We need to be very wary of big industrial corporations controlling cannabis trade, because they will do what they did with alcohol, a very unrestricted marketing of this substance and producing dosage which potentially could be very harmful. It's the small scale farmers that have historically grown low potency cannabis. That's what we should be decriminalizing.
Okay, point well taken. I'm completely out of time, but Mr. Satpathy, I promised you a response to the earlier comment. Please go ahead.
I completely agree with Vikram. What he says makes sense. Let's not mix up cannabis. There has been many studies, and all of them say that about 4%, 4.7, 4.8%, let's say 5% of cannabis produced in the world is used for recreation only. The rest of it has industrial purposes, medicinal usages. So why are we focused on who's going to drive getting high on a joint? That is not my issue. If you want to smoke a joint, then you are probably not even interested in driving, because that seems to be the most boring thing when you are really, when you are discovering yourself, when you are enjoying music, when you are with your friends. This is not like alcohol. So people who drink cannot imagine what a joint can do. It opens up many vistas. So all that I'm trying to say is, let's not focus only on the recreation part. I am not bothered about the recreational part. I am talking about small farmers. I'm talking about startups. I'm talking about marginal people. Why aren't we giving them the scope to earn more money? Legalize it means give it to some of these big corporates. Decriminalize it means leave it to the people to earn their living. Today, the police harasses the small grower, the small user. The NDPS Act is not used for big people. The big people go out anyway. So why are we focusing only on recreation? Let's just go beyond, a little bit beyond that 5%, and let us realize that there's 95% other usages. Like Dr. Ambedkar also very clearly said that it has so many other purposes, medicinal, and we discussed that earlier about cancer patients, so many other you suggest. I will vouch for one thing. If you have used cannabis in your youth for a long period of time, it is possible you do not need specs. Your eyes are perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Satpathy, and I appreciate the honesty with which you speak, and and the interesting point that you raised. I don't think a lot of people have spoken about the differentiation between legalizing it and decriminalizing it, and how decriminalizing this specific substance can actually open up avenues even from the small farmers to those who may want to be doing business for products that we can get out of cannabis. Viewers, suffice to say that it's not the first time this conversation has come about. Even our government has looked into the option of having a conversation, mulling decriminalizing it or legalizing cannabis and marijuana in our country as well. Now that we've taken a stand on it internationally to say it's not the most dangerous substance, it needs to be put out of that list, maybe it is time to also have a bigger conversation here in our country. And step one would actually be to deal with the perception that a lot of people in our country, across the world, have had. In our country we still do, is to say, oh, the minute you open it up, you legalize it, you will see drug addicts lying all over the streets, all across the country, destroying generations after generations. This is a more nuanced debate with a lot other aspects involved in it. So let's open up to at least having that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us.